Well, Anna Deavere Smith is known for her powerful one-woman shows, reenacting interviews she conducted with real people to tell their stories. Her latest production, Let Me Down Easy at Berkeley Rep, explores the experiences of more than 20 individuals confronting their physical limits, illness, and mortality, and their encounters with the healthcare system. KQED's David Iverson spoke with her earlier.
Anna Deavere Smith, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I'm interested first in asking you what drew you to this story. So much of your prior work, like Twilight Los Angeles, was drawn out of a particular event, an iconic event, the Rodney King riots. This isn't so event-driven. It's about something intensely personal, facing death, and also the way our system responds to that moment in time. What drew you to this sort of big, sprawling, but also very personal idea?
So in the around 2000 and a little bit before, I was invited to come to the Yale School of Medicine to interview doctors and patients, and was asked to create a performance for Medical Grand Rounds, which is, as you know, a lecture series for doctors. And I was just so drawn to, first of all, how people recount stories if they had an interface with medical professionals or if they were ill. And 5 years later, I thought it would be a good subject to go to for one of my plays. And then at the time, I cast the net very wide. I did over 320 interviews, many of them in 3 African countries, some at Landstuhl and Ramstein military bases where our soldiers go to get patched back together before they come home when they've been injured. But then, when I was about to bring the show to New York, and it had already had 3 other productions, is when President Obama was rolling out the health care bill. And I thought, well, I should really refine this so that what my play can do is tell human stories for what, as we know, will be very, you know, clipped and pasted and cut and coutured language of politics.
Well, some of what the play deals with is the different experiences people obviously have with our healthcare system. Let's take a look at one character. This is the character of Ruth Katz, who's a cancer patient being treated at the Yale Hospital. Only something happens. The hospital loses her records, and she's being interviewed by someone trying to figure out what kind of cancer she has. And then something else happens.
You know, he says, do you work? You know, about midway through his questions. And I said, I do. And he said, are you working full time? And I said, I am. And he said, where are you working? I said, I'm associate dean at the medical school. Now he looks up. At this medical school? I said, at the Yale School of Medicine. He found my files within a half an hour.
And it points up, of course, pretty dramatically the different ways that people are treated within our system of healthcare, juxtaposed later with one of the most powerful characters in the play, which is the doctor in New Orleans at Charity Hospital at the time of the hurricane.
Well, certainly a part of the crisis is that we all aren't, unless you have a lot of money, you're not going to be able to get everything, right, anyway. So let's have that as an overview, and certainly people who are vulnerable are really going to be left out. And, you know, we don't seem to be concerned enough about that.
I mean, it's not just their records that are lost. They're lost.
They're lost. In this case of, yes, I went down to New Orleans after Katrina, and this is a hospital for poor people, Charity Hospital, one of the oldest hospitals for poor people in America. It's now no longer in existence. But they were stuck there for 6 days. Nobody came to get them. And
part of what we learn in that particular story is the grace and the courage which with that doctor treats those people. And that also seems so central to this play that you've brought to us. That is how, even though it's about the system of healthcare, it's really also about us and about the way we respond to those intense moments.
And in fact, you've just made the argument for why works of art can be so useful at this moment as we think about healthcare, and we also think about other kinds of care, or just the disparity between rich and poor and who's going to get left out in this country, is that, you know, politicians and legislators do a lot to try to change the conditions that we live in, but artists can really come forward and get to that human part, that personal part. And also, and when we get to that, to suggest that we as individuals can make a difference.
Let's look at one other character. This is the character of the Reverend Peter Gomes, late Peter Gomes, who was the chaplain at Harvard for many years. And it's what he says at the gravesite about bringing people back to that moment and remembering what happened there.
And then my job is to try to urge them to come back. I say, I don't want you to leave here today full of terror and sadness and sorrow. I want you to know that this is the place that you can come to recall to life, in whatever fashion you have, the person we sent off today. I say, come here again. Bring flowers. Remember your loved one.
So much of this play also seems to be about that quality of memory and of keeping people's lives inside our hearts.
Yeah, that's where we can all live on and on and on, is inside of the heart of someone else. And yeah.
And you ask often within the play, sort of, what is it that sustains people in these moments when they're facing death in this unfair and sometimes inequitable system? In the end, what did you find that does sustain people?
I think grace and kindness. You know, you talk about Peter Gomes. I went to talk to him, the late Peter Gomes, specifically to learn about grace, which it turns out is mostly a Christian idea when we think about that song, Amazing Grace, and Jewish people have mercy. I also talked to a Buddhist monk who I portray in the play, and an imam. But this idea that actually grace is not like good luck. It's that we all have a possibility for transformation inside, but it assumes that there is inside of us an instinctive draw to that which is good.
One last quick thought. I was struck in the program, it describes one of the characters, Joel Siegel, the movie critic, and it says in the program, in the theater program, that he lost his battle to cancer. Phrase you often see in obituaries. But it occurs to me that you don't really lose, do you? If you do face those moments, if they are held deep in your heart and remembered in the heart of others, you don't lose.
Or I suppose what we wish for is that those very moments of loss, any kind of loss, are the moment when we can find meaning. And I suppose that's part of our human predicament, is to find meaning. It's even in loss that we can find that something else, meaning.
Anna Deavere Smith, thanks for being with us. Thank you for your work.
Thank you. Thank you for this work.
Let Me Down Easy runs through July 10th at Berkeley Rep.